Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm going to be doing a two-parter since this archetype is one of the largest ones, and that is the model slash heartthrob slash stud slash babe slash pageant person. So essentially, this archetype are for people who are mainly cast for their looks, whether it's due to them being very, very, very fit with nice toned bodies for the men or nice curvaceous bodies for the women. They look great in bikinis and they are more often than not on the younger side of things. A part of this is because obviously the network knows that casting more attractive people, and especially attractive young people in social experiments like this, where it's about the relationships, will cause more ratings, especially with most of these people having the biggest chances of being in showmances due to their use and looks, and casting people who are a lot like them. So these people are the ones where you'll have a lot of commentary about their looks from the other house guests. They'll comment a lot about their looks themselves. You can tell that they are positioned to be the studs or the babes of their season. I also want to clarify that not every person who's good looking is going to be on this list. You can tell when someone's of this archetype when production definitely plays into their looks, if you look into the intro packages, or just how the house guests react to them. So, this video is going to be about the men, and then my next video is going to be about the women, since there are a lot of names, and it just makes sense to split them up per gender. Obviously, the first prime example of this archetype on a male standpoint is Hardy from Big Brother 2, and it was very clear from the very beginning that he was supposed to be the beefcake hunk of the cast, but he had a huge heart. There were a lot of segments of him working out shirtless throughout the show. They definitely made montages of his sounds while he's working out. They showed a lot of reactions of the woman and Bunky reacting to him. There's a lot of talk about how good looking he was, and a lot of the house guests as well talked about how he had such a good heart and he was such a well meaning guy. And he definitely used this good guy narrative and looks to his advantage. But as the season went on and as he got more and more into the gameplay, he turned people off from him due to his more devious actions and not really owning it, as well as him dyeing his brown hair black, him getting bags under his eyes, smoking, and he seemed a lot more devious and even well commented that his looks reflected his character change on the show. But he definitely set the standard, and he's probably one of the more multifaceted examples of this archetype. Chronologically, we are moving on to Roddy on Big Brother 3, and literally, from even the cast's reaction, he was clearly this season's replica of Hardy to the point where it even annoyed Roddy. He definitely had the fit body, but he was kind of seen as an older soul and more of an intellectual. And Roddy definitely knew that he was considered good looking, and he definitely used that towards his advantage, and it was a part of his charisma. But he was mainly about charming people to do what he wanted without being like a bone in a china shop, kind of like Hardy was at times. And Roddy was very, very, very cognizant of the perception outside of the house to the point where he came off as inauthentic a lot of the times as well. But he was clearly seen as the standard good looking white guy that was going to take over the season and run with it. Not just because of his looks, but because of all of his skills as well. I can definitely tell with Hardy and Roddy, they definitely already knew what they wanted to do with this archetype from very early on. Now on to Big Brother 4, and I do believe the heartthrob of the season was Nate, and he's different than the other two in a few reasons, or in a few ways. One is that he was significantly younger than the other two. They were in their 30s, while he was like 24, if I remember correctly. He also had the quote unquote idealized all American look with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. And I also think with the dynamics of the ex's twist and him not having an ex enter the house, it definitely benefited him. A lot of the women talked about how attractive they found him. He had a lot of great relations with all the women at first, but then he kind of just got stuck on Allison. He started getting a lot more petty, and he kind of lost grip of his social game. And then there's a lot of talk about the man and the woman thinking that he's a homosexual male, essentially, and that definitely caused some effects on him, even outside of the house. And people just kind of turned on him because he didn't really have a whole lot going for him after a while, especially after the Vita move, and whatever potential that he did have went away. He wasn't as capable as the two prior on a gameplay point of view, in my opinion. And shockingly, the final person from the golden era, or the classic era, my bad, is Drew from Big Brother 5. And no, I do not think anyone from Big Brother 6 was positioned to be the heartthrob slash stud of the cast. And I think that's because the male cast was kind of a mess because there's supposed to be more men than women, and I don't think anyone was put in the position where they were supposed to be ogled at by the woman. And it's clear that Michael just didn't feel that at all, and he's probably the closest person. Anyways, on to Big Brother 5. Yes, there are other men who are quote unquote conventionally attractive that fit the list, but Drew was clearly the one that was positioned to be the heartthrob of the season, and we got that from how the cast reacted to him, despite him being aligned with the four horsemen who were either cowboy, who just wasn't respected, or were hated, like Scott and Jace. Drew essentially had good ties to everyone. They all still really, really liked him. They respected him. They all, the women and Will, talked about how good looking he was. And he definitely just had a very calm personality, which he definitely used towards his advantage. And it was why he ended up lasting so long in the game. He definitely knew when to play timid to his benefit and advantage, and then he knew when to step it up, and he would kind of hide behind that persona so he can make his cutthroat moves. And it's something that you definitely do have to kind of give Drew credit for. And he was able to weaponize it in a way that none of the others before him that fit this archetype could. Hence him winning the season and him being one of the few of this archetype to actually win Big Brother. I also think that compared to the others from this era specifically, Jew definitely had a baby fight element to him, whether it's due to him having more of a baby face, him just not having as much personality as the others, or with people like Roddy and Hardy coming off as more grown men, like more like grown up men compared to Drew, who I think was like 22 or 23 during the season. And Nathan, I kind of mentioned how some of them saw him as flamboyant, or he was just too much at times too. Now we are moving on to the post-classic era, and obviously the first season in that is Big Brother 8, and I do have two people from this list, and that is Mike and Nick. And ironically, they were booted back to back very early on in the season, so there isn't much context with them. So with Mike, just from his preseason interviews and stuff, it was clear that he was supposed to be a very good-looking charmer, and he was a model, though they hid that. But there was that scene where he and Nick were working out, and it was kind of like ogling over their bodies. So I think that they wanted him to be the charming hunk or whatever. But once he got into the house, it was like he had no social skills and he didn't really speak to anyone, and it really turned people off of him. So he didn't really fit it, despite him clearly being cast for this and having the look for it. Nick definitely fulfilled this role. He came into the house wanting to flirt with people just because he's a flirty guy and so it can help his game. We saw that with Jen, though that backfired pretty quickly, at least in the game. They would date for a while after the game. And then he got very, very close to Danielle, where they had a romance. A lot of the women and a few of the LGBT men just ogled his looks. He was seen as an all American hunk. Even a lot of the guys respected him. He had a really good social game, but he had no concept of the game, and he kind of forgot about that. And it kind of caused Destin to send him home, though everyone got so emotional about it because he was so liked. So I definitely do think Nick fits this category. And he's kind of like a Nathan, but I think just less skilled overall, despite him having the potential to be really good socially and strategically, but he didn't really care at all. But yeah, he's definitely exhibits the negative elements of this archetype when it comes to the game. So things get kind of weird from here on out. I don't think anyone from BB9 fit the category, and I do think that due to the partner's twist having a huge effect on it, and I do think they cast around the twist. So there wasn't anyone who stood out a whole lot to fit in this category, and even in Big Brother 10, I don't really have anyone. You would think Jesse would be a shoe-in, but they never really focused on his looks or his charm or the women really, really loving him, at least in that way. She, uh, yeah, no, I don't feel comfortable putting Jesse here, and he never really. See, if Jesse did fit, you know what, F it. I'm gonna put Jesse here, mainly for Big Brother 11, not Big Brother 10. In Big Brother 11, he got along with a lot of the women. Most of his close allies were the women. There's a lot of commentary about his body and his significantness, specifically on that season, not in Big Brother 10. There's a whole triangle with Lydia and Natalie there. So I think his Big Brother 11 performance put him here, but not his Big Brother 10 performance, if that makes sense. Memphis, I'm really only putting here because I do think from his intro and his casting package, they tried to set him up to be the heartthrob of the season, where they talk about him being the mixologist and him being a very huge flirt, but once he got into the house, that never actively materialized, and I think he had a girlfriend during the season, though that clearly didn't stop him on Big Brother 22 with Christmas. But yeah, that's really all I care to say at this point. And now that I think about it, I do recall the two of them had a decent amount of modeling shoots and stuff around this time, so I guess it makes sense for both of them to fit this category even more. And now, regarding Big Brother 11, and I guess their second season in Big Brother 13, I am referencing Jeff, and he's obviously a shoe-in for this archetype. He's arguably the biggest example of this archetype, especially within this era, but maybe of all time regarding Big Brother. It was immediately clear that he was cast to be the conventionally attractive white man that everyone would lust over, and we did see a lot of the women talk about how good looking he was and how he was so sweet and all of that jazz. But with the way the dynamics in the Big Brother 11 house was like, it didn't really benefit him much since he was on the outs, but he was never really the main target. So he was not able to get to Jari, and due to the dynamics of the house, and he was given this heartthrob edit, especially with his All American showmans with Jordan. He was voted by the public to receive the coup d'etat, which he definitely used towards his advantage. He changed the dynamics, but it still got him booted because he wasn't the best strategically. He comes back in Big Brother 13, not only being the main man of this archetype within the season, but he also had veteran privilege, which means that he was favored by the producers. The newbies that were cast to help him out, and the audience obviously wanted him to win. So he came in knowing that he's the favorite, knowing that he had all this backing. He came off as a lot more entitled, but the newbies were still so much more in awe of him, even if he acted the same way that a Brendan did. And the same newbies who liked Jeff didn't like Brendan. So Jeff definitely weaponized this archetype towards his advantage. But the fact that he wasn't the best gamer meant that he could never pull out a win. So with Big Brother 12, I shockingly don't have anyone here. I don't know if it's because I really just don't give enough about the season, or because I think a lot of the men on this season were way too similar in personality and archetype, so they weren't easy to distinguish themselves. You would think someone like a Brendan or a Hayden or even Elaine could fit this role, but I don't recall their looks ever being brought up in their intro package or even by a lot of the other house guests. They're not really using flirting as a strategy or whatever. I just think it's with a lot of the men. Yeah, with the men on the cast, you have all white people, all but one or two are a certain age, and they all have a very similar mentality. So there's not much to discuss here with this season. Hey, so looking at the Big Brother 13 male crop. There's relatively slim picking when it comes to this archetype, but I do think they wanted Dominic to fit into this archetype. He was a model before the events of the season that was brought up quite a bit. He definitely wanted to charm the women and all that, so it was in his strategy, and that mainly worked with Danielle, which didn't really do him any good. I guess good for him from using it to find a wife and the mother of his children, but game wise, it didn't help him at all. And because he was also seen as more threatening than a lot of the other newbies, he was booted relatively early. It was interesting that he's the first non white person or non fully white person who fits this archetype, and you'll kind of see this trend continue with it, most of the people here being white. On to Big Brother 14, and this one was a very obvious choice, and you clearly see here I'm putting Shane in this category. So he was a model, though I think that the show tried to hide that because they don't like having a bunch of their castmates have model under their names. He had the sweet but nondescript personality that isn't going to offend anyone. He was seen as conventionally attractive, and a lot of the women really did like the way he looked. They gave him chance after chance after chance. Not that he screwed up a bunch within the game, but they always saw the best in him. He's going to do what people want him to do. He got into a somewhat showman with Danielle. He was always seen as the conventionally attractive white male hero who's going to steamroll his way to the win. And to be fair, he was very close to doing so if it wasn't for Dan pulling that infamous move. But Dan knew that Shane was like a Drew when it comes to the archetype, so he made the move. This one's pretty self explanatory. I don't really need to go much into detail about it. The final person from the post classic era of Big Brother to fit this archetype is Nick. He's yet another one where they decided to hide his modeling career, though that's clearly one of the reasons why he was cast to begin with. But he does have a huge interest in science and all that stuff, so I guess them pushing the more nerdier side definitely worked too. Anyways, as soon as Nick came into the house, a lot of the women were gushing over him more than anyone else. A lot of them wanted to get with him, though he himself didn't want to get with any of them, and it was definitely a huge thing. Despite that, a lot of the house guests also just didn't speak to him much, so it showed that outside of his alliance and outside of the women crushing on him, he didn't have much of a social game, and all this was just a combination of the house structure flipping, and it caused him to get booted. So he's probably the worst example of this archetype, and that's all I care to say, to be honest. Now, on to the modern era of Big Brother, and obviously that starts with Big Brother 16. And I only have one person on here that represents that season, despite there being more than one conventionally attractive man, but they weren't positioned in the same place or in the same way this person was. And obviously, I'm referring to Cody. Right from the beginning, there's a lot of focus on his muscular body, even compared to a lot of the men who are more muscular than him. There's a lot of focus on his body, there's a lot of focus on his looks. Cody knew what he looked like, and he knew that he was going to flirt to benefit himself strategically. And we saw a lot of the women talk about how much they love Cody, which they didn't have that same reception to other fat men like a Caleb or a Devin, so on and so forth. And he definitely weaponized this and used it to get to the end, though he would boot some of those women because that's what Derek would have wanted, though it would have benefited him more to keep the woman around a bit longer. But it really didn't matter. Everyone loved him, partially because he was an attractive man, but he fits the white heartthrob to the T. He comes back on All Stars, which was 6 years after the first season. Cody's a bit more aware of the show. He actually watched the following seasons. Post 16, he actually watched prior six. He watched the seasons prior to 16, but he still definitely had his looks to his advantage, where he had a lot of the women wanting to work with him because he is so comforting and all that. due to that, but he was able to win out. He was a bit more cutthroat, and Cody definitely. I think within the second half of BB's run, he is the prototypical person of this archetype, even over someone like Jeff Schroeder, partially because he won, two, because he's still involved in the BB fandom, and three, I think his legacy also kind of carried on forth via his brother, who we will talk about soon. Chronologically is another man who is seen as one of the best looking men to ever be on Big Brother outside of Cody, and that is Clay from Big Brother 17. It seemed like for a lot of the season he was definitely lining up to fit Cody's trajectory with getting along with a lot of the women, getting along with a lot of the men, him having the look that everyone gawked over in the house. He was seen as the all American boy, but I do think there are some major differences. One, Clay didn't care about the game as much as Cody, though Clay was involved in a lot of what was happening, and two, Clay was a lot more hot tempered, which eventually bit him in the butt, and he just lacked the social grace that Cody had. He also got showmanced with Shelly from the very, very, very beginning, so he couldn't really flirt his way through the game, and it kind of caused him to like sacrifice himself. But yeah, he's definitely one of the notable prototypes, though he wasn't as successful as some of the others, despite arguably being seen as the best looking ever. So I spoke about one Calafiori brother, and that obviously was going to lead me to talk about the other Calafiori brother in Polly. And if you've noticed throughout these videos, I put Rachel and Alyssa in the same archetype, and I also did the same thing with Vanessa and Tiffany. And I'm doing it with these two because clearly that's what the producers intended. Polly's intro was him being shirtless, talking about how he loved being nude and he couldn't wait to flirt with the women. He entered the house, definitely did all of that, and a lot of the women thought that he was the hottest and the most attractive man in the house. And he had the social game, he had the strategy, he had it on. It seemed like he was bred for this, like he himself stated, and he was going to follow a similar trajectory to Cody, if not better. Polly's ratchet. He's just ratchet as hell. He's ghetto. The personality, it just came out very insecure. So he obviously ruined his spot, and his pretty white privilege couldn't get him out of the jam he created for himself. And due to some other issues that we've since found out about, it makes sense why he kind of crashed and burned in the mid jury portion. So I don't really have much else to say about him. So I debated putting on this person, and obviously I'm referring to Victor, but I am putting him on because he essentially manufactured this spicy, suave, hunky Latino man archetype so he could get cast. Because when he came in as his normal milk toast self, when he was auditioning for BB16, they found him boring, so he grew his hair out, drew as the typical Latino player, suave guy, and then he got cast. He heavily played it up in the intros to an obnoxious amount. He even admitted to doing so post season, but once he got into the house, he wasn't the guy that everyone swooned over in the house. He wasn't the guy that could use his looks and charms to get what he wanted. It honestly backfired um, a lot at the time. People kind of gawking over Polly, and I think that's why the two of them kind of had that underlying dynamic because they were essentially cast to be the same archetype, but Polly was better at it than Victor, and Polly took Victor out, and I do think that was a motivating reason as to why. But once he got into the house, he really didn't have the same amount of charm. But yeah. From Big Brother 19, I did end up putting Matt on here, though honestly, I wasn't the most confident on that. I do remember a lot of the women talking about how good looking he was, and he was well positioned for a lot of the season, but he was just so passive throughout the game. He was bragging about wearing the same shirt, and he had some other gross tendencies. He also linked up with Raven immediately, so whatever appeal he had when it came to fitting this archetype essentially faded throughout the season, though he still became a mid juror, and there really just isn't a whole lot else to say about him. he wasn't a flame out like many of the ones who went early, but he wasn't ever really a contender either. So, as you see here, I didn't put anyone on Big Brother 20 on the list, because when you think about it, there are definitely a decent amount of fit, muscular men on the cast, but none of them were really portrayed or executed themselves as heartthrobs, and they weren't treated as heartthrobs. Brett and Winston were both kind of just meatheads, though Winston was kind of portrayed as the more conservative, hot-headed person. Brett was mainly the jock who was somewhat smart. Tyler was the plant superfan surfer guy. Fessel was also just the dumb jock, essentially, and no one else really fit it, so that's why no one from Big Brother 20 is on the video, and none of the women treated anyone like a heartthrob on this cast. So, when it comes to Big Brother 21, I unfortunately have Jack, and it's clear just from looking at him, he was cast to be the hunky Jason Momoa type on the season, not only just because he mentions that he's always compared to Jason Momoa due to the long type 2 hair and the physical appearance, but we definitely had a lot of the women talking about how attractive he was in the game, and he somewhat used that to his advantage, but I just think his personality turned more and more people off, and he came off as a lot more aggressive. So he took a different approach compared to many of the men in this archetype, and it caused him to be the first juror. And I also think him and Jackson also kind of just brought out the worst in one another, and he wasn't as good in the game, and he's just very uncomfortable to watch and very aggressive, but I don't care to talk about him anymore. And that will be it for this era. Honestly, it was a lot harder to find men from this archetype, and I don't know if it was due to the producers actively trying to cast without it, or the diversity initiative caused it to change or to divert a bit. For Big Brother 23, I think they wanted Xavier to be the black version of this archetype. Obviously, he talked about him being a model all the time. Also, that was due to him hiding his career. And there's definitely a few women, especially Asa and Whitney, who definitely crush on him. And he definitely weaponized that to his advantage, especially with Asa. He could have with Whitney, but he didn't really push it. He somewhat flirted with the women, but he did it in a way where he didn't want to hook up with any of them. So Alyssa would have been the exception. And I think they were trying to make him the black standard for a lot of these very easy archetypes. So that's really all I have to say about Xavier. I want to add a bit more commentary on Xavier. When the Alliance was talking about who was the quote unquote perfect representation of the cookout and who wasn't, they practically used a bunch of the isms and all that stuff to justify why Xavier would be the best representation. A part of that was his class, a part of that was his career, a part of that was due to him being more palatable to white people. Another part was that he's the perfect representation of what a black man should represent, and part of that definitely has to do with looks and the beauty standard within the black community. And if you understand the nuances of that, you will get why I put him here. And I explained more about this in a video I made about the cookout dynamics. So I struggled with Big Brother 24. There was a time where I wasn't going to put anyone. Then there were times where I was only going to put one person, but as you see here, I put two. And obviously we're going in chronological order, and what ultimately caused me to put Joseph on here is that I do feel like he was cast to be Big Brother 24's Xavier. They're both lawyers, but hated by relying on careers that involved their bodies. This time it was him being a personal trainer, and I already put him in that category. Joseph had a lot of decent relationships with the women like Indy and Jasmine. Some claimed that they liked him. He had a somewhat flirty interaction with Amira, but that also went nowhere. And obviously, we know about him and Taylor. So he definitely could have just used his heartthrob trait to just woo over the women, but he didn't know much about Big Brother and didn't do that at all. There's a lot of focus on his body, even in the edit and by the other, so that was also a contributing reason as to why I put him here. But like Xavier, he didn't really use the traits like many people before them did, which is why I struggled putting him on. Crown is definitely someone who fit this archetype because he was seen as the all good white boy who the women thought was so cute and innocent, and due to his cute appearance, he couldn't do anything bad or strategic, and he was always being tricked to do something. So Cal definitely worked that towards his favor. Obviously, he had the romance with Alyssa, and everyone else was always so soft on him due to his doe-eyed appearance, which Cal most definitely did. But I do remember a lot of the women thinking that he was cute as well, and the diary room definitely propped him up to fit this archetype. And I think his jealousy of Joseph definitely played into this, kind of like the dynamic between Polly and Victor on Big Brother 18. And obviously, Kyle ruined his game because he got paranoid about people outside of his phenotype, and it just was a bad luck, and not even his privilege could protect him there. So, Big Brother 25 is kind of interesting, and I do think they wanted Matt to fit this archetype, but adding on to his disability, it added a different layer of this. Of course, he had his dyed golden curly slash wavy hair. He had the build. He obviously had his disability, which made people feel sorry for him. And Matt definitely knew how to weaponize his image so he could get away with the gameplay and the deceitfulness that he was actively doing. The crush with Riley never really went anywhere, but I do feel like he kind of weaponized this archetype against sorry, he used him fitting in this archetype to weaponize it against people like Cerie and Felicia, who always brought him in to their game plans, who always defended him, who they would choose over some of their own closer allies. And he definitely uses pretty white privilege to his benefit, especially adding onto his disability. And I'm mentioning that because he would actively state, "Oh, I can't hear," despite him hearing and knowing what's going on, so he can get away with it. So I feel like he fits this archetype in a much different way than essentially anyone else. Big Brother 26 wasn't hard at all, and it was very clear that they are trying to set Matt up to be the heartthrob of the season. A lot of the house guests talked about his looks. He talked about his looks and how people negatively judge him due to that. His main alliances were with two women, i.e., Mackenzie and Leah. He didn't really get along with much of the guys, and his conflict with Angela was partially due to the perception of him being the huge heartthrob that usually runs the game, but he didn't have the skill sets to really do well in Big Brother, so he became the first boot, and I believe he's the worst performing person in this archetype. Obviously, once Matt went, it caused for another person to kind of fit into this archetype, hence Tucker being here, and I think Tucker wanting Matt out partially had to do with them somewhat being of the same archetype in this way. A lot of the women gave Tucker chance after chance after chance after chance, despite his aggressive behavior and his erratic gameplay. A lot of the women wanted to work with him. We saw this with Mackenzie and Leah, but then he essentially shut them down. And then obviously Rubina and Chemo both had crushes on him, but obviously he would work with Rubina, and a lot of the women talked about how much they liked him. And then once he officiated with Rubina, a lot of people got mad at him. Tucker is also someone who didn't get the game whatsoever, so despite him having pretty white privilege, he didn't really use it to his advantage, which caused him to be booted at the end of the pre-jury portion. He was just too erratic, too ratchet, and that's pretty much all I have to say about this. So the Big Brother 26 ones were most definitely flops. Okay, I finished this video a lot quicker than I thought I was going to. As you notice, there's a lot. Most of the people on here are white men, and the very few that aren't white or aren't fully white are either spicy white or mixed with white, with one exception. So I think that says a lot about the beauty standard and how CBS sees it, or just the common trope that this is in media and how they decided to execute it in Big Brother. So obviously I'm going to do the female version. Hopefully that won't take very long. So that's one video. Then I have the religious god worshippers. Then I have the gimmick slash pet slash camera whore archetype. I could do the outcast one, but that seems way too self-explanatory to the point where I don't feel like I need to even make a video. So chances are I have either 3 to 4 of these videos, but probably just going to be 3. And I'm not going to make a video on the racial minority because I already went through that twice now. Anyways, thank you all for supporting. We're getting closer and closer to finishing this. And yeah, have a nice day.